Thank you.
Happy Wednesday.
Yes, happy Wednesday. We'll just give people a few more minutes. We've got people coming in at a rate of knots at the moment. Hey, Pauline. Okay, Brian, well, we might pop up our slide. What do you think? And we'll get started because we've got about, probably coming up to about 45 people on the line now.
Sounds great. Ready when you are.
Okay, so if you want to pop, you've got a holding slide there, have you?
Yep, I do indeed. Let me just do that. Let's see.
Great stuff.
Alrighty, can you see that?
I can. Look at that. Fantastic.
Excellent. Perfect.
So, hi everybody. I'm going to start by, there are many people that have joined us from overseas. In fact, we have more than 100 companies across 8 countries and 125 people registered for this, which is absolutely an awesome effort. One of the things that we do in Australia is acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. Can I ask everybody to put themselves on mute? Thank you. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, and I'm going to call that the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I live in Leichhardt in Sydney, not too far from the city, and they are the traditional landowners here, and I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. And I know we have many people from around Australia, and I also pay my respects to their local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well. And, you know, just as I was saying, we have, 125 registrants from more than 100 organisations across 8 countries, which is absolutely an awesome effort. We've been running these sessions over the last couple of weeks in response to COVID, and we've created a new campaign called RegTech Open for Business. And this is really about helping our members and our larger stakeholder group help to navigate through some uncertain and very, very challenging times over the next couple of weeks. And I was absolutely delighted that at the same time, in synchronicity, our members, Ascent RegTech from Chicago, were also running a series that they were calling Open House. And I figured since we were open for business and they were running an open house, that we could get together in partnership to present this session for you today. And so that's what we are doing. We'll cover, how COVID-19 is going to impact the RegTech industry globally, and what will happen through a bit of turbulence in the markets, and whether this alters the relationship between RegTechs and financial institutions, and how we also expect the regulators to respond. And we're lucky, in fact, to have some of the regulators on the line right now. We've got some fantastic people on this call, really high caliber and quality people and contributors to the association. I wanted to put our map up there to show you how much we've grown. We started 3 years ago with a very small handful of RegTechs, and we've now grown to an organisation that is run on a non-profit basis and we exist simply to accelerate the adoption of RegTech, and we want to help the people on this map and others who might be interested to join us on this map. We want to help them navigate through these uncertain times over the next few months, but very much keeping our eye on the prize of accelerating adoption. Some housekeeping before we go on and I introduce Brian to you more formally. If everybody could leave themselves on mute. And what we will do is Brian has a presentation that he's going to do, and then he's invited some questions and opinions rather than questions and answers, because perhaps, perhaps we don't have all of the answers, but it'd be good to share this as a really an open forum, and who knows, some of this may furnish some of the discussions that we have going forward. Now, what we'll do is, instead of asking questions verbally, what I'm encouraging people to do is to use the chat function. And as Brian is traversing his presentation, if you've got questions, please pop them onto the chat, and I'll do my very best to curate all of those and feed them through to Brian. And last but not least, just so that you're aware that we are recording this session, and it will be made available on our website to download. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you formally to Brian Clark if you've not met him. Brian is the CEO and co-founder of Ascent RegTech. It was founded in 2015, and Brian came into that role with a long history in working in regulation, initially in market regulation, a variety of market regulation roles, and then moved on to Chief Compliance Officer and Global Head of Compliance roles. And so we're really delighted to have him here today. His firm is scaling globally and does business around the world, so he's got a very good global overview. And also, we'd be really interested in, and certainly I'd be interested to talk to Brian about, you know, what is the climate and the economy looking like in the US, and if there are people on the call who have business interests in the US or have investors in the US or perhaps are doing business in the US, what might they expect to be experiencing over the coming months? So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Brian now. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Deborah. A pleasure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, good here.
Wonderful. So always a pleasure to speak with folks all over the world. I think one of the amazing things about the society we find ourselves in now is, with the folks we have spread everywhere, with the folks working in RegTech in Australia, in London, in Chicago, in New York, wherever they may be, it's really amazing to develop a community, a sense of community that has no respect to boundaries, to borders, to start to build something together. And thank you, Deborah, for leading that charge for this community. It's been a true pleasure to be a part of it, and looking forward to growing for many years more. So with that, you know, what we're going to talk about today is, obviously we're aware of the current environment, and we've titled this "In the Midst of Chaos: Shifting from Reaction to Recovery." And there's always those moments when you're in the middle of something that require a different set of focus, a different mindset to adjust to the contemporary environment. And then this is although different from the perspective of what has caused the so-called chaos, how do we as an industry and a set of business leaders support our communities and react to that to grow RegTech? And so we'll dig into that for a little bit today. So going forward, again, just want to recognize the community that has been put together and the folks on the call. It really has been a pleasure to get to know many of you, and I'm looking forward to meeting many of you on my next trip to Australia or wherever it may be. As Deb said, I run Ascent. Ascent is a RegTech company that automates regulatory change management and regulatory intelligence, born out of my experience both as a regulator post-financial crisis, and then ultimately as a chief compliance officer and general counsel. And again, Deb, as you said, lots of opinions. Happy to answer questions with those opinions, and hopefully we'll all get to the facts together. So with that, go ahead and get started. Again, shifting from reaction to recovery in RegTech in the midst of chaos. So from an agenda standpoint, I'll talk about three things. First, what is the effect of the pandemic on RegTech and financial firms, broadly speaking? Secondly, how do we realign? How does this alter relationships between providers and firms? And of course, lastly, what's next? And I think that, again, we can offer some prognostication without 100% accuracy, but hopefully look at some past experiences to what we should expect going forward. So what we've had over the last, I want to say 10 years plus, one of the longest bull markets has come to an end. Obviously, the metric on that a couple of weeks ago. Stocks plunged pretty precipitously into bear market territory. And although I think many of us expected the market to downturn, it was quite quick. And there's been a lot of volatility since then in both directions. In large part, the world has ground to a halt. We've seen a lot of decisions, a lot of financing, a lot of purchasing slow down dramatically, if not stop completely. This sort of event is unprecedented in modern times, especially on the scale that we've seen it. I've talked to folks all over the world, many of whom find themselves in the exact same situation. Comforted in one sense, troubling in the other. What we don't know is what the long-term ramifications will be. The uncertainty around everything has increased and caused the funding to dry up, at least in the US markets and what we're seeing a bit globally. This environment is directly affecting the financial industry, and while that's where many of our RegTech solutions were born, and we know that is expanding, it is impacting RegTech as well. Lots of startups, in fact, probably the vast majority that would even qualify as startups, have never been through a bear market in their current companies. And to survive into the next one, we need to be thoughtful about ways to adapt. So funding takes a hit. CB Insights report provided that the ongoing global health crisis has already had an impact on funding markets. We've seen a decrease by approximately 25%. The numbers, I think, shortly to come out on the final. But even with the downturn cycle occurring, it's still the second steepest decline in the past decade. And we can expect a similar trend in RegTech too. What we've seen in RegTech is that the numbers have just started to increase in kind of middle market cycles, where post-seed, product market fit, you're starting to see companies enter that growth stage, that post-proof of concept, iteration, and deployment to market. And so in general, it can be a bit of a challenging time in the RegTech market, given what we've seen both in private financings and the trajectory of our industry. So let's talk for a moment about before and after the crisis. RegTech, as I just mentioned, we're in that threshold phase. Providers are looking to move out of the innovation, the POC phase, and into production environments as technology is accepted. If those of you, any of those of you who are familiar with the diffusion curve know that you always have the kind of early leaders enabling new technologies, supporting and bringing those to market. And you have those fast followers who start to productionalize these RegTech solutions. Given that we are starting to move into that productionalized phase, that provides challenges in this world. However, those that are already producing solutions should be able to find meaningful success. The market is desperate for cost-saving technologies. If we look at the returns to labor and capital, neither of those hold a candle to the returns to technology. And given the RegTech focus, that is a potential boost to our space. In bull markets, people look to increase revenues generally, and in bear markets, look to cut costs. And we've seen that from a labor standpoint here in the States pretty dramatically with record-setting unemployment numbers over the last couple of weeks. These cost savings will likely continue into a bear market recession. Sorry, folks, if anyone's on the line, could you please mute your lines? Thank you. What we do see happening is that those in the innovation phase will likely suffer significantly from the lack of funding. The word in the Valley and in many of the funding circles is, and I quote, we're still taking meetings, we're still investing, but the numbers show a different story. The talk track is, of course, continuing relationships and continuing discussions, but the investment dollars, as you saw before, had materially decreased. Now that was at the later stage private equity markets. anecdotally, we're seeing the exact same thing in the earlier stage markets as well, is that valuations already have been discussed as coming off of their highs, and investment cycles will be much slower. Many of the entrepreneurs that I've spoken with actually have directly reflected that this would not be the time they would want to be raising capital here in the States, especially because of how hard we've been hit. So the financial services dilemma, how to do more with less. The bear market means the budgets will have to be trimmed. We've seen numbers ranging from haircuts around 10% to 30%. And it's really split in a couple different ways. First, if you're post kind of A-round investment, we are seeing a little bit longer runway pre-significant revenue. So folks have more cash flow from investment dollars to last towards that kind of what we consider that holy grail of 18 months runway at a minimum. Of course, nothing's guaranteed. Folks with ongoing businesses in the digital space, we've seen be a bit more resilient to the downturn, given that churn is much lower in many of these businesses and it's not ad hoc purchasing. But nonetheless, some of those businesses have suffered drops of 30, even 50% revenues that aren't as insulated as a result of the budget trimming. Nonetheless, the cost of compliance has continued to increase. Regulators in the states have indicated that while they are offering relief from some of the day-to-day audits and cycles, you are still required to follow the rules, and there absolutely will be a look back. If we've learned anything from the 2008 crisis, we know that there is a lot of ask questions later, and we fully expect there to be many questions later. In addition, the workload and importance of risk and compliance is going to increase. It's been playing a crucial role in business continuity and implementing new procedures. That will likely continue. I think pandemic responses will, of course, make their way into all of our disaster recovery and business continuity procedures. And in addition, financially, we'll already had conversations here in the stateside on commercial real estate and other loss protection mechanisms for insuring against both business losses related to pandemics and even occupancy and tenancy for commercial real estate. So as a result, firms caught in this position do more, you're going to get less. A lot of folks are squeezing bottom lines, and the only way forward is technology. So the case for RegTech is actually stronger. We see a lot of technology businesses over these past cycles that are forged in fire. And as RegTech has kind of come of age over the last couple of years, using it as a cost savings tool was a potential benefit before. And as you can see here, now it's a necessity. One of my favorite quotes from someone who builds products out in the Valley actually is, when you're in that bull market, you want to build something that people want. When you're in a bear market, you need to build something that people need to have. And that's that transition that RegTech actually can provide. So there are still obstacles ahead. There are a lot of priorities that we have in the market that we need to continue focusing on. We do anticipate a bit of a long tail in RegTech's need inside the market. That is, as reactions from regulatory bodies, governments, and even other commercial enterprises come into the market, likely into Q3 and Q4, we are anticipating a bit of an uptick in the digitalization of modern work. Many of us have had the opportunity and are fortunate enough to be able to work fully remotely in technology businesses. That trend will accelerate, and we believe that given the importance of risk and compliance and regulatory workers, they will look for digitalized and centralized solutions that help take them forward in this new world. So where do we go from here? First, in the short term, the length of trials and proofs of concepts could be harmful to startups. In cash flow weak environments, RegTech providers will need to monetize production earlier. That means decreasing the length of POCs, decreasing the lengths of trials, lowering evaluation periods, and setting clear criteria to actually ensure that there is mutual benefit and mutual value exchanged. The flip side to that is, at any stage, it's a partnership. work with your folks with whom you're testing, with whom you're proving out. And it's always be stage specific and be empathetic to the customer journey, because this isn't about the size of the business. It's about what that business is facing. We've spoken to many partners, customers, and colleagues in other startups who are experiencing this sort of cash flow crunch and trying to find creative solutions. The stories consistently through downturns with new technologies are to work with your key partners, facilitate something that helps them in a time of need, so you don't need to go out and sell in this bear market. And that will return tenfold as you develop a partnership, right? Don't look for customers, look for partners. Over the long term, and as the dust settles, financial institutions are going to look to implement cost-saving technologies. You can see in many communities now, or commercial communities, that folks are starting to look for solutions, and really the downturn being the forcing function of looking for those new technology solutions. We actually anticipate that trend will increase and be included in budgets in fiscal year 2021, or I'm sorry, calendar year 2021, as the crisis hopefully recedes quickly and we look towards economic recovery. So the regulatory response, a little bit iconic for this group, given that we have direct support and or impact on much of this. The last financial crisis in the States, of course, led to Dodd-Frank. There were a number of regulations and laws promulgated all over the world. But we expect there to be significant action on that front as well. It'll likely be, as I mentioned a moment ago, a wave of new regulations around business continuity planning and disaster readiness. And these will not be specific to pharmaceutical or medical communities or even state governments or federal governments. It'll be across the board, and every commercial enterprise will have to grapple with the risks and costs associated with this. Tail risk is tail risk until it happens. Currently, some regulators have actually warned that they will not be relaxing or loosening the rules. So while audit requirements and actual review requirements have decreased, given the need to be digital and remotely, some have actually come out and indicated that they won't be decreasing that risk of prosecution or risk of investigation. And folks should continue to be diligent in their compliance with the rules. So for those that are prepared, there are a couple of real opportunities. And I want to talk through really the 4 stages that I see. And again, this is high on the opinion chart, and happy to take challenges or thoughts around this. So the 4 stages I'm going to talk through briefly, that seed stage pre-revenue, product in market post-revenue, scale up, and then mature stage businesses. So first on the seed stage, if you're pre-revenue and you've just raised a little bit of money, you've been fortunate enough to close that from a timing perspective or are in the midst of trying to do that right now, pick your partners, be judicious, actively qualify customers, investors, people who you're going to spend your time on, because as much as entrepreneurship in the RegTech market, we are building against the clock. That's only going to be exacerbated by the downturn. Second stage, product in market, post-revenue. Focus on reducing those sales cycles length. Make sure that you're serving that need so that your partners work with you to accelerate that timeline. But be thoughtful about trials and POCs. Be thoughtful about where you're spending your limited and precious time and resources, because you won't have the runway or the backup equity markets or potential debt funding or whatever financing vehicle you may use that you would have 6 months ago. And what I often say is the best financing strategy is revenue. If you can go without equity or debt investment in this market, obviously a priority for those of us building technology market or technology products that require investment, maintain vigilance and focus on reducing that cycle length. Third, scale ups. Probably not the time to introduce new products or services as you streamline your core business, but instead focusing on those core offerings. We've actually seen financial institutions that had a number of experimentation groups looking at new projects really start to cut back and focus on that cost reduction and direct need. And that can actually be helpful for folks who have valuable products in market, for the RegTechs that have really solved that problem, that sticky problem, that will actually be very beneficial as some of the noise gets cut out of these budgets and the fat gets trimmed, so to speak. Lastly, mature stage businesses. the life cycle of commercial enterprise requires a balance. And so to those who have large cash balance sheets, access to public markets, government funding vehicles, access to federal discount windows, they're likely much more capable of weathering a storm like this. And so one of the opportunities is to actually reach that hand across the aisle and support the looming, downturn and support RegTech companies that are innovating and creating value. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean for dollars, but for the opportunity to work together to prove something out and to grow it together. Consider how you can help these firms realize even small amounts of cash flow and sponsor projects. That is the lifeblood, is the momentum for a startup, and in particular in our market, the RegTech group. So with that, I will stop. I think we should, that should say Q&O, and we will do some questions and opinions. Deb, I will kick it over to you.
Put myself on mute and just one second. Sorry, I'm just trying to find if there are any questions so far. I'm sure there must be one question at least out there before I dive in. Otherwise, I'll dive in. Okay, I'm going to dive in. I'll dive in while somebody dreams up a question to put on the chat. Would be really good. I note what you said really about monetizing production earlier, Brian, and be thoughtful about POCs and trials. You know, it's kind of sometimes what I hear is that's easier said than done. Can you expand on that a little bit more for the benefit of what your thinking is, or what your opinions are, should I say, sure. around those points?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a sliding scale here, right? I think the qualification up front is the most important piece of this, to understand what comes on the back end. What kind of value can you create for your customers on the back end? And if you can't understand what that value is, what the potential dollar value economically, or even from a goal orientation for the people you're supporting, it's going to drag. And making sure that you have those set up front, those clear timelines, those clear agreements, it's going to do a lot to limit that downstream thrash. So I'm not saying don't do them, but I'm saying be very intentional. Also, I think there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs in the RegTech community to take, and any entrepreneur community, to say, hey, you understand where we're coming from, we understand where you're coming from. Let's slim this down, let's move a little bit faster. And there's been reception to that and support. People all know that we're in it together.
Yeah, for sure. So just on a slightly different tack, what role do you think the association can play to help people through? I mean, obviously we have a goal to accelerate adoption and to help break down some of the barriers, and we're trying to do what we can in bringing programs such as this to people, to give them deeper insights and so on and so forth. But what else do you think that we could be doing as an organisation now, representing at least 100 RegTechs, part of our membership now?
Yep. Yeah, I think, first of all, having the community in and of itself is really an excellent place to engage in conversations. And I think that there's an opportunity to learn from one another of all sizes. I believe it was Horowitz, Ben Horowitz, who said that startups need to get distribution before incumbents get innovation. But the flip side of that is startups can help with innovation and incumbents can help with distribution. And so having a community like the RegTech Association to bring us together and facilitate those conversations, that's hugely valuable, and I think an opportunity to continue.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm sure somebody out there must have a question for Brian. No, but we have somebody says they've got to run to the next meeting, but they were great messages, Brian, and thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
I do have a question, perhaps a bit more specifically around the current situation in the US right now.
Mhm.
So what's the feeling? What's the mood? What's the flavor? If people are doing business over there now, what could they or might they expect?
Yep. And we got a couple questions coming in, so we can jump on
Yep.
those in a second. So the mood in the US is one, I would say, of confliction. There are conflicting messages. I think there is an acknowledgement that there has been a significant amount of challenge with how our government has handled the response to this crisis, with a lack of facts, a lack of details. And I think to the surprise of many. And that has certainly been, from a management standpoint, a difficult challenge. What we find is that commercial enterprises here let me take a step back. There's a book that was written by Raghuram Rajan, and he was effectively the Federal Reserve Chair for the Bank of India, the Federal Bank of India, and for the country. And he has a theory on there being three pillars: markets, which are businesses, governments, and communities. And he said these three pillars make up a fully functioning society. And I think we've seen in the States really a tremendous outpouring of community support in ways that I've never seen in my lifetime. Very, very encouraging. We've seen businesses, markets step up and take the lead, both for protecting their people, and even when they have to make cuts, and it has happened, supporting those people, supporting the environments that they live in, and the ways that those are done as much as possible. Where I think there's been a real gap is from a government response. We did pass a very large stimulus, and that was a great step. But I think there is, again, a perception that a lot of that went to commercial enterprises with very little individual Main Street support. So remains to be seen.
Yeah, right. So can you see the questions on the screen there?
Yep, absolutely.
Starting with Cheryl, I think, at the top.
Yeah, we'll start with Cheryl.
Oh, that's a question for me, actually. So for Australia, yes, ASIC is still engaging with us. In fact, we had a call with them last week. I'm not sure whether anybody from ASIC is on the line today, but we did have a call with them last week, and they're going to be actively working with us to roll out some programs over the next little while. And they, in fact, poured it in on a call that we did the other day just to see how we were doing live virtually, to get some ideas for some programs. So they will continue with their ASIC RegTech liaison forums, and they're likely to be in a virtual format, obviously. And also just shaping up what their program is going to look like for the rest of the year. So definitely very much still engaged with us. Thanks for the question, Cheryl.
All right. Guess I'll hop on the one from Neil.
Yeah. Yep.
Great. So the question from Neil was, you said that scale up should not introduce new products at this time. What about logical extensions where there are new niches opening up for RegTech, i.e. online meetings, et cetera? So I guess two thoughts on this. First, I think the distribution mechanism you're using won't be in person. It will be online meetings right now. And so if that's what that's referring to, I don't think that changes the product offering. But to your question on logical extensions, I would be, I think you're always looking for opportunity. And sometimes when we're given the retraction in sales, projections are as much as 50% reduction for firms. It could be an opportunity to drill into your product right now if that's where you want to focus your cash. But I would be extra vigilant about market testing and really going out and talking to customers right now. If you're going to extend that product suite, it could be a gold mine. It certainly could be. But I'd be, I think, without the normal cycles of feedback, you need to be very, very careful and thoughtful about what you're building and where.
Great. From Mark Staples from Data 61.
Yep. So what I can speak to really here in the States is what we're seeing. I can share from our customer base and the folks we're talking to what we're seeing. Certainly, COVID regulation will be broad reaching and likely more impact on the public health systems and individual preparedness. But from a regulatory and compliance standpoint, the impact that we're starting to hear about is this focus on distributed teams and digitalization, that it's actually being looked at as a risk mitigation to have sources of truth, to have tools that work the way basically financial SaaS tools worked 20 years ago. So this industry, I think, is quickly launching not only into that, but through that and creating an opportunity. So my prediction on this is in about 3 to 5 months, we're going to see those discussions really kick up. And then for fiscal year 21 budgets, some significant dollars spent on modernizing, digitalizing. And I think that will be a boon for the industry.
Yeah, thank you. Alison's just asked us if we could please read the question, because then it makes more sense in the recording.
Yep. Great point. Okay, and that question for the recording, I can share that was, will COVID response and recovery impact how organizations approach regulation and compliance, not just new COVID regulation? Great. Okay, next, what do you see as the traps for startups and scale-ups with government STIM packages? So this actually has been a point of contention and discussion in the States. And in most places that we've seen, there are conditions on these stimulus packages. Again, I'd be thoughtful. There will be a look back, right? There will be a look back on compliance with the requirements. And the irony of this industry is that we better extra cross our T's and dot our I's. I guess from a core Friedman framework principle standpoint, to the extent that the stimulus programs help and you are eligible for them, I would say go for it. But be very thoughtful and seek the clarity you need to make sure that you aren't inviting unintended consequences. If you have the cash to continue, great. If you need it, that's what it's there for. Okay, should I keep going, Deb?
Yes, absolutely. You're doing a great job.
Great. Peter Deans, do you sense a retreat from overseas expansion for U.S. corporates, big tech, and others from this period? I don't know enough yet to know if there will be a retreat for U.S. corporates. I think there's a bit of an isolationist policy making right now that is likely having an equivalent impact on that. But dollars flow, money flows, and I haven't heard rumblings of limited overseas expansion. Do I anticipate that will be the case in the coming months? Yes, but TBD on the impact. So not enough data to say where we're at yet on that one. Next question from Brian Tang. Brian, which RegTech segments do you see as the lowest hanging fruit at this moment of the global pandemic, other than video conferencing?
Yeah.
We're good. So I'll go back to the point I was making earlier. Look for a system that was a bit more antiquated, that was paper-based, that is human-to-human workflow-based, that requires on-site review. A lot of those sorts of workflows and processes, it will actually be a risk to the business to not be compliant in times like this, and will require modernization, whether that be audit programs or investigation processes. I've seen some pop up in the collection compliance affidavit collection, looking for documents and resources. So anything that modernizes the traditional risk compliance and audit processes that require human interaction, I think will be an uptick.
I also think that digital identity is going to go up the food chain too. Brian, a couple of weeks ago in Australia, when the first wave of what do we call it? Not retrenchments, but the first big wave of unemployment, and people started queuing up outside our Centrelink offices, which is where they would typically get unemployment benefits. And they were forced to do that simply because they needed to identify themselves physically. So there were literally thousands and thousands of people queued up outside these offices across Australia, going on for blocks and blocks and blocks as people were lining up to register. And needed to physically, and obviously that was a COVID risk in itself.
Yep.
Absolute craziness. So I think digital identity is going to be one that goes to the top of the list, certainly.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think an adjacent space, and furtherance to your point, Deb, we've seen a material relaxation on pretty much all things related to medical regulation, pharmaceutical regulation. They've given the FDA pretty broad powers in emergency situations to authorize the usage of treatments and other products and technologies that would never see light of day nearly as fast or ever in some situations. And so that relaxation comes with the benefits and risks, and appropriate in this case, but it'll have some permanent impacts, as you're mentioning. Okay, let's keep going. You mentioned the likelihood of regulation about business continuity. Do you sense this will just be more regulation added to current regulation, or a more holistic approach? So I guess this gets to 2 points. First, I think it depends on the jurisdiction. I think those, we saw this with GDPR, where GDPR was a bit more restrictive. I think in the States, we have had some data privacy that's been couched in other areas. We have the CCPA, and I know you folks have your privacy and security regulations down in Australia as well. So we're seeing that those pop up. I would anticipate it'll follow the same track, where you'll have some that are extremely restrictive. There will probably be some unintended consequences from some of those. There will be some that are too liberal and don't really do anything to fix the next crisis. And so it's about striking that balance. So that's the first point. I think it'll depend on where you're at and the regime that is in power. Here in the States, there seems to be a bit of denial. And I think that is really going to require some significant review, both sides of the aisle, to really ensure that we put rules in place that protect people, will be the next thing. And then my second point on this is, I think we're in a bit of what I call the common denominator for commercial enterprises in regulation, where many folks that operate internationally or across jurisdictions, or even if you touch or concern that jurisdiction, you may have a customer there and then get pulled in that way. We all end up complying with the most restrictive set of rules. That's certainly why California did it, because they knew that everyone is in California. And so all the companies in the United States were going to have to comply with that set of rules. So I think this kind of common denominator, go to the most restrictive so you're compliant with all of them, is going to continue. Okay, let's keep going. Do you think that the current environment is changing the definition of the why and what value is in the RegTech ecosystem? Again, I go back to my point on digitalization. I think that RegTech has always been a future promise, a future value, and we've started to pull that towards the nearer term. I think there will be some that fly away and don't become valuable, and there will be some that focus on solving a need. And those technologies, again, the distributed technologies around audits, that mentioned digital identity, those values will increase in this time frame. Okay. All righty. Deb, should I keep going?
Yeah. Do you think the current situation levels the playing field, i.e. Australia no longer disadvantaged by being so far away and unable to meet face-to-face as regularly? Well, I have an opinion on that, but I'll hear yours first.
Sure. I think that trend is changing regardless, by the mere fact that, we're able to do this. And I think what the internet and digital connection has provided is communities, networks, business groups are more connected by common interest rather than the requirement to meet face to face. But Cheryl, I think it's a good point. I do think it's going to kind of shift even more than it was before, and maybe some legacy requirements around face-to-face meeting are going to go the way of the dinosaur. Deb, I know I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So it's really interesting, because I've had this conversation a lot over the last little while as we've been looking to pivot our our programs online. But actually through this challenge, what we're finding is it's actually opening up new opportunities. So, for example, I was having a conversation with a regulator the other day, and we were talking about a program that we would like to design together. And the good part about it is for them, it's that now with the ability to put this on a virtual platform means that it's actually opening up the whole world to the opportunity, as opposed to just traditionally probably only having, a few homegrown solutions available. It is actually going to open up a whole world of global opportunity. So I think that is really interesting. And by the mere fact that we can have, 8 countries on the line for this call today on what would typically be more of a domestic Australian audience, and that we've actually branched out and that we have, the likes of Brian and Ascent, who are members of the association, I think that truly says that this is now global. And I think going forward in our programs, what we're going to start to see, the only thing that actually gets in the way are time zones actually now. So it just might mean that instead of getting these poor people out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning in London, as they are right now, we'll be able to run exactly the same event to a much broader and more global audience. And as long as it kind of suits the time zone, then sky's the limit. So out of adversity, I think through some creativity and using these online platforms, we're actually going to be able to open up a whole lot more opportunity both ways. It's going to mean more competition. It will certainly mean more competition, but I think more availability. And, I posted on LinkedIn last week, just as an overlay to that, what I'm finding in the last couple of weeks is I am having super authentic conversations with people. And that's because we're running sessions on a Thursday afternoon, which are just drop-in sessions. And they're really meant to support us, the community, through, mental health issues, or how are they working from home, or how are they homeschooling their kids, or what are they doing for fun. And that's a really important part of being, our authentic selves as we bring ourselves into this. But, the conversations with very senior people, actually, it's a great leveler when you're actually kind of sitting in their kitchen or their lounge room or their study, or, or their bedroom. And we even did a call last week. Somebody was in their bedroom because they needed to actually get away from the kids, and the bedroom was where they went to hide. But all of a sudden, it's that personal thing. And I liken it almost to, you get in a taxi, and you might speak to the driver, but you don't feel particularly bound to speak to the driver because it's a commercial thing. But when I get into an Uber, I actually have an authentic conversation with somebody because I'm in their personal car. And I think that's the difference in what we're seeing. So I actually think not only globalization, but actually more authentic conversations. And if we can carry the essence of these fantastic things through this crisis with us, I think that as a society and doing business and everything, we'll be actually much better off as a result of that.
Very well said.
Thank you. I think we'd already answered Peter's question, hadn't we? Yeah. So down to James.
So I think the question from James, a RegTech is most powerful when the reg suits the external landscape. When the landscape changes so quickly, some regs may need to be adjusted before a tech solution is being built. Any areas you are seeing great friction where reg is falling behind, it does not support a fully integrated digital age. Do you want me to go for that, Deborah? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, no, it's fine, because I've lost that question. I can't find it anyway. It's there somewhere. Sorry.
Sure.
You go ahead.
Yeah, I think I look at the ecosystem in really 3 phases. The first is generating all the knowledge, content, analyzing the words, et cetera, that can be done with humans or with machines. Obviously, at Ascent, we use machines. That's the phase that we sit in. Then you have that second phase, which are container-based tools, workflows, technologies that integrate data, pull people in, pull people out, that sort of thing. And then the last are tools and technologies that actually implement a reg, right? These are not, the first 2 I call compliance and regulatory products. The last one I call compliant products. And I think, to your point, James, these are going to, that's a harder reactionary set to be in, because you're at the whim of the regulation changing, and there's no agency by those government groups to ensure that you have a calm sail, if you will. So areas that I'm seeing great friction, I think we've seen a bit in the States. I can speak to where we're at. We've actually seen much more limited rulemaking and actually an easing of many of the regulations, some good, some not so good, that is probably reducing the investment in those tier 3 solutions, as we call them. And that's just what I'm seeing from my perspective.
Was that our last question?
I think it was.
Yeah, I think we got to the end. So do you want to do a quick sum up, Brian, and then I'll say some stuff after that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. A lot of talking on my end, and I appreciate all the great questions. No, just really, I think we're at a point that we don't have enough data to know the direction we're going in the next 6 months, but we also know that it's not going to be the same as it was before, right? This is going to be a fundamental shift to the way business is done, engagements are created, and work is completed. And so I think it can present as opportunity to all of us, given that we're in that technology kind of digital first mindset. And I think it's up to us to approach that with empathy to what our customers are facing every day and to develop those strong partnerships. And then, of course, continue to build the community to share information and support each other. And that's how we'll get there. So thank you, everyone, for the great questions.
Yeah, no. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate Brian. It's getting a little bit late there in the evening in Chicago, so I appreciate the effort that him and his team made to be with us today. We will be circulating a quick survey after this, and I'd really appreciate it if you would complete that. I know it's a bit of a drag to fill in a survey, but it'll be short, I promise, because the important part of the survey is probably towards the end, where we ask you what else you would like to hear. And we're using that to furnish the next sessions as we go forward. Three things I would like to say. First is, if anybody would like to be in touch with Brian, I'm sure he won't mind if I connect you up. So please drop us an email and we can do that. Brian, are you okay with those slides being made available to the people on the call?
Certainly.
Okay, we'll make sure that that's made available to you. And then just a reminder, tomorrow we have our drop-in, which is at 4:30. Is that right, Al? 4:30?
Yes, it is.
Oh, thank you. 4:30. But please, if I can get you to register on the homepage. Last week we didn't think we had any registrants for it, but and some people used the link from the week before, which still let them in, and they had a nice conversation with each other, but we weren't there. But we weren't there. So if you'd like to drop in tomorrow, please do that, because we're keen to keep those alive, just to keep the community connected. And then next week we're working on bringing you a bit of a UK perspective to the discussion next week. And then we're also looking at launching one of the New South Wales ministers the New South Wales Minister for Customer Service will join us next week for a special webinar as well. So without further ado, we can probably sign off. Thanks to Brian once again, and thank you to all of you who've taken the time out of your busy day. So great to have you all here connected. And if you're not a member and would like to know more, please get in touch with us.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
I just want to mention one more thing.
Sure.
Just as a thank you to the community that you created and the folks here. We do have an announcement coming out to the market, but we're going to be offering a free access to market participants that we met through RTA and folks around here. So we'll be sending some information out for that, and appreciate the community support as always.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.